Nordic Africa Institute organized a workshop on women's political representation in Africa. We asked 3 of the participants working on 3 different countries about the quotas that many African states have adopted as a way to achieve greater gender equality in political parliaments.
My view is that they have been quite effective in increasing the numbers in many African countries.
Quotas are a good step towards ensuring equality.
We call it the fast track for getting women into governments.
But the problem is, of course, to reflect upon, are these quotas working to promote a pro-women or gender equality agenda?
But then what becomes problematic is then how they are implemented and the kind of women that get into these positions of power, because of course it's not just about descriptive representation, it needs to be substantive and have positive symbolic effects.
We need, and I think there's an expectation that when women are in government, they will change conditions for other women, and that doesn't really work that way. So what we talked about, for example, at this conference is how do we do that type of research? So looking at parties as gatekeepers, who do they actually put, if we have a PR list system, who do they put on the lists? Where are the obstacles? What do we need to do to actually ensure that descriptive representation leads to substantive representation?
In a number of these countries that have adopted quota, they are characterized by at least semi-authoritarian features. Does it actually lead to any transformation of unequal power structures? And what are actually the motives behind putting them in place? It could be to legitimize the regime. It could be to please donors. However, what is also important is to which extent these female parliamentarians in place have a link to women's constituencies. And in the case of Rwanda, it is actually the case that there is a memorandum of understanding between the National Umbrella Organization and this Forum for Female Parliamentarians. So there are linkages to women's constituencies. Also, these quotas are not just based at the national level, but also at the local level. And it has been clear from my research and focus group interviews in the rural areas that there is a growing acknowledgement that women can actually play different roles than in the past in politics.
And when you're looking at the Kenyan context, we have this 30% quota, what's famously called the 2/3 gender rule. The Supreme Court gave the directive that this formula should be derived at by August of 2015. That came and went by, nothing. So there have been various proposals on how this can be achieved, and every time this thing goes to a vote, of course it goes to the National Assembly for voting, and it never goes through because you're looking at an assembly that's largely populated by men.
The governing party has a 50% quota and we have 42% women, so it is an example of a success story. But what's happened is that the ruling party is so factionalized, is now that women are taken up in these factions, and then they don't want to put gender issues on the agenda because they are afraid that it will, alienate the men in the faction. And so it's about their own political survival and their own self-interest. And I think that is a problem. So we've had amazing legislation. We've made women-friendly legislation. We've changed a lot of the conditions around violence, around reproductive health, and so on. But nevertheless, we have one of the highest rape statistics in the world. We have enormously high levels of gender-based violence, which also tells us that you cannot fix everything with legislation. So what we need now is to change attitudes and to change ideas around women's bodies and the violence inflicted on women's bodies.